Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Talk Crazy to Me. I'm your host, Tanya, and today my guest is Incia.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Incia. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for being here. Thanks for doing this with me.
Of course.
So I always start off every episode by first saying how we know each other. So do you want to say how we met?
So we met the summer of 2002. We had just graduated the first year of university. I was at Carleton University at that time, and you came with your cousin,
Yes.
Francis, who we're still all friends, to Ottawa. And
Yes.
we had a summer in Ottawa.
We did. It was a very, it's an interesting time of our lives, right? Like we were just sort of leaving the nest in a sense, right? At least you did. I was still at home in university, but I would just kind of go around to everyone who had left the nest and just, party and visit people. And so that was sort of my university experience. But I loved to come to visit people who were away and go to different places and just, kind of live it up in different areas of like Ontario, basically. I didn't go outside of it for friends in university, but I do remember coming to visit you the first summer. We had just finished our first year of university and we had so much fun.
Yeah.
So we met in Ottawa.
Yeah.
We didn't meet here.
No.
So yeah. And
I had a condo, and I was friends with someone that Frances knew, and she went to college with her.
That's right.
And she was just like, I'm coming to visit you in Ottawa. I'm bringing 2 more friends. I was like, sure, the more the merrier. I love the fact that we just clicked.
It was very instant. That's why I'm saying I didn't even feel like that was the first time we met. But it was.
Yeah.
And we really just
I
had
had a
great
condo,
time.
so all 4 of you just came to stay over. And I feel like it was just like such a, it's just an easygoing weekend. Like, it didn't feel like,
we
these
were just
2
meeting
girls
each other.
are, someone we just met. And, like, the fact that we got along right away, too.
All got along.
And we spent, I think, like, you came for, like, either a weekend
It was
or
a
a couple
weekend.
of days.
It was a weekend, but maybe a long weekend.
And we just got along. And that was just so natural to happen even, in your, I would say, like, in your early teens.
Yeah,
late teens, early
early
20s. So, yeah, and I think, like, we just kept in touch after that.
We really did.
And we went out. I think I came back to Mississauga that summer. Mm-hmm. And then we just hung out. Like, we went out together a couple of times.
We did.
And I think from then onwards, we just saw each other year after year.
We always had the Sag connection, I think.
Yeah.
And then we just kept up throughout the years just in contact with each other. Then we kind of both did a yoga experience that was similar.
Yeah.
And then I remember just having like times in our lives where we were very connected in things that we were going through, or like say I went through something and then you went through something similar right after. Like, we don't have to get into like details if you don't want to, but there were just some similar things that were going on in our lives.
Absolutely.
That were life shifting in a sense. And I just remember one time, I'll never forget it, you reaching out to me and being like, I remember if you got through it, I could get through it. And it was a very like, it made me feel so nice to know that someone else had kind of been through something similar, but like had gone through it and like had seen something in me that they could, saw some bravery in it that I just thought was pretty cool.
Well, I think it's also like people who go through things that are life-changing, as you mentioned, in their lives. And I think we always have this like thought in the back of our mind that like, what will other people think?
Yes.
Or will they think less of me?
Right. Or I'm the only one.
Am I the only one?
Yeah.
And I feel like even now, having matured into a woman in her 40s, I find that the more we kind of speak out about topics, ideas, experiences that we're going through, that the more people look at you and are like, oh, if she did that, or if she's doing that, or if she handled that and she's okay, I think that there's hope for me as well.
Right.
So I think that for me, it was one of those things where it's like, I don't think I'd experienced someone else having gone through that experience. And I was
Yeah.
like, if someone else is doing it and they're like, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be okay. I'm like, well, I'm going to do it too.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be okay.
And I think there is power in, and that's a part of what this whole thing is about, is talking about our journeys, because we don't realize how aligned we are sometimes unless we talk about it, right? Like, how would you
100%.
know that we shared that moment together if I hadn't shared it for you to know? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's just, I think it's just, there's so much power in it, and in being vulnerable, right? And letting those things out there. But okay, so let's go into my first question that I ask everybody, which is, Incia, what makes you crazy?
I think that for me, craziness just kind of alludes to like the mental overload that we have these days, right? And I think that we are in a time where a lot is happening
Yeah.
for us as humans, as women,
Yeah.
as aging kind of appears. And I feel like the mental load over the years as I've experienced has like, it's what kind of makes you crazy.
Right. The expectation, maybe?
100%.
The expectation of what society kind of places on us to
Yeah.
be normal, I think, in a lot of ways, is what I think kind of makes me crazy.
Yeah.
So, like, things that, you expect by a certain age, this is supposed to happen, or, by a maturity level of, there's all these expectations of where we should be at certain times in our lives. And I think when we don't reach it at the time we're supposed to, we feel bad about it. And then we
100%.
feel that mental overload that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's a really great, well-rounded answer of like, what can make you crazy or feel crazy, right? I think it's the feeling of being crazy, of just not knowing exactly where things fall into place all the time.
Yeah.
And that when they're not falling into place, we have this sense of
Overwhelm or
yes.
just like, yeah, like, oh my gosh, I can't handle that anymore. I can't do that anymore. Or this is going to just drive me nuts, right?
Right. Do you remember the first time in your life experiencing that feeling? Do you remember, like, not maybe the first time, but like around, like somewhere where it first started to happen to you?
I think that it's always been within us, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we just never acknowledged it properly.
Right.
I think that the first feeling that ever comes around is like in your teens. 100%. And I think that we just don't we don't really embrace it. We just kind of like push it aside or think of it as like these are like your teenage years and it's going to be fine. And,
Right.
you just kind of don't really, it's almost like the concept of like pushing it under the rug or
Yes.
just ignoring it till it goes away. And I feel like I'm hoping that there's like a lot more awareness now
Yes.
that like, women who are in their teens are dealing with a lot of whatever it is that is driving them crazy,
Yeah.
to kind of come to terms with it and then, begin this like journey of like, how can I fix this or
Yeah.
how can I be better at it? So I think I would say like teen years for sure. Like even, when you're going through like changes of A, like puberty,
Sure.
B, like high school to like university transition, like your first heartbreak.
Yes.
Like nobody teaches you how to deal with any of that. And I think we don't even talk about it as much in our teens. It's like you just kind of brush it off and you're like, on to the next or move on to the next.
I think a lot of times, and it's interesting because we both worked in the schools, but a lot of times, a lot of that stuff is happening during school time, right?
Yes.
Like when you're going through heartbreak with in a relationship or friendships that are falling apart or anything that causes, mental and emotional anguish on our lives. I think sometimes in school we're taught to like focus on your subjects and focus on whatever. And then, I always thought it was funny because I was in schools to be working with kids with their mental health. So I would be like a little bit outside of the box of, the regular school subjects. And it was so funny because I would always say like, when breaks hit, lunch hits or whatever, what are teachers talking about? Or what are, like, we all talk about our shit, right?
Yes.
So it's like, when do we have time or give kids the time
To talk about their shit.
to talk about their shit,
Yeah.
to process their stuff, to figure out what's going on with them mentally? Like, when do we give kids the time to talk about it?
Yeah.
And that was always what I was trying to kind of push my way in to do, but it was hard because the expectations
Yes.
come back in,
100%.
and there's all these expectations that they have to meet. There's no time
No.
to talk about your mental and emotional well-being, which
No.
is crazy because that is what carries us throughout our lives, right? Is how to be mentally
Yeah.
strong in certain moments. And it's interesting because it is that I hope we've gotten away from pushing it under the rug, because that is, in a lot of ways, what we were taught growing up, is you just kind of, you deal with it, you push it under the rug, and you don't realize how much pushing it under the rug
You continue
messes
to
you
do.
up.
Yeah.
Because it will stuff it and stuff it and stuff it until you eventually explode and need to get it out in some form of capacity. So I think there is a lot to say about that piece of where
The disconnect,
the
right?
disconnect, and how do we teach
Hey,
it?
we got into trouble for talking in class. Like, how do you know if I was having a bad day that day
Right.
and just needed to like vent with a
Yeah.
girlfriend of mine
For a
or a
minute.
friend of mine, and that was my moment because
Yes.
we used to move from class to class in high school. You never really got a moment,
And when you did get a moment, you took it.
and that was like a slap on the wrist of like, why are you
course.
talking during my class?
Yes.
The only time you got was maybe at like lunch hour, and,
Right.
and that was it. And no, I definitely agree with like that acknowledgement of, just having to embrace that mental side of what you hold, starting in the years that you need it the most.
Yeah. And I would argue it happens even younger than teens.
Oh,
I think
100%.
it's smaller in the sense of like the problem seems smaller, but
Yeah.
like even when you're in kindergarten sometimes with kids and they're just like so angry that so and so won't share their toy, or whatever they go through, for them, their problems that create this mental issue for them.
Yeah.
It's almost like, okay, let's just solve the problem, but like, what about what we're feeling and how we're feeling and why we're feeling that way, and how that piece. So I think it starts literally so young, and if we put some kind of something in place to start to teach, okay, well, how do we deal with that anger? How do we deal with those emotions? How do we regulate those emotions? How do we react in a way that doesn't harm anybody or ourselves, but still get out that, whatever's in there?
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting how young, for me, in watching what I did with kids in all age groups, from kindergarten to high school, how interesting it is to see how early it starts.
Yes.
And how it progresses if it doesn't get
Dealt with properly as well.
Yeah.
Like it's, and as you mentioned, like I'm a teacher as well, right? I'm an
Yeah, of
elementary
course.
teacher. So I teach mostly between like kindergarten and grade 5.
Yeah.
And like there's big emotions that happen between those stages.
Yes.
And if we don't recognize it as educators, as parents, right? Then it definitely leads to much bigger issues.
Yes.
And I think like, again, we mentioned like the whole, I guess like pattern that is in our school years. And like we spend a lot of time in schooling institutions, right? And like physical was always more important. Like, why is there no mental health component in your phys ed class, for example?
Anywhere.
Right? There was nothing in there
Yeah.
that was actually had to do with mental well-being. It's changing now. But again, I feel like it's very much at like a superficial level, right?
Yeah, a slower pace than what we probably need it to be at. It's good that it's still starting, and progressing. And I even remember starting to go into schools towards the end of my career with it, and they were doing sort of mindfulness practices and, you know, meditation pieces in the morning or yoga or those kind of things. And you're just like, wow, there it is.
Yeah.
Like finally, like we're kind of putting it in there and realizing how important it is to breathe and to
Take a
slow
moment in the
down
day.
and just, you know, take a moment to just reflect on what's going on. So I think it's starting to get there. But I do remember it being something that didn't exist when we were in school.
Not at all.
And what's interesting that I always remember for me is that even if I was going through anything mentally, emotionally, anything like that, it wasn't recognized or like seen as a problem because I was really good in school. Like I did really well in my subjects. So no one saw it as a problem.
No.
Right? They only see it as a problem when you're misbehaving, you're struggling in certain subjects. If you kind of come across as a well-rounded kid, no one's paying attention to anything else that's really going on with you, which is just interesting to kind of fall through the cracks in a sense.
Because grades is all that matters.
All that mattered.
Right?
So I fell through the cracks, and then there was times in high school where I remember I was so anxious, like so much anxiety. But again, because, you know, I could do well with my grades, it didn't matter to...
You weren't...
I wasn't seen as...
You weren't a glaring problem because you were doing as you were told.
Yes.
And you were getting the grades that you needed to get.
Yeah.
You were meeting all the standards, right? And it's like and you hear about this all the time where you have like, you know, A grade students, but then they have like a total meltdown.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like often university, like have like this, you know, very detrimental, like, I guess you could say, like end result as well. And people are shocked because it's like, whoa, she was an A grade student.
Because you were holding it together for so long that eventually you have to crack, right? Like eventually you have to break a little bit. Yeah. And I think, so I do recall a lot of those moments where I was like, wow, no one was really paying attention.
No.
To like what else was going on.
But you know what I also like these days is like the a little bit of the changing tune of like, and this is, I think it goes for like any sort of field that you're in, is like taking mental health days.
Yes. Big deal.
Right? Like you should allow for yourself, your children, anyone that kind of wants to have that day, because it should not always be just like I'm physically not feeling well,
right, like
and I'm going to take a day.
Everybody understands when you have the flu why you stay home,
but
nobody understands when you're dealing with like sort of a mental health day.
Yeah. Like I just need a break. I need to shut out the world, and I need to just focus on me and like self-care and give myself what I need, and that's okay. Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of getting a little bit more attention, and I kind of like where that's going. Yeah. Because we do need that, right?
We do need that.
Like it's a mind-body connection.
100%. I would argue that most, to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily say it and say I'm taking a mental health day, but if I was in the schools and I was having my sick days, I would say 90% of those days were taken for mental health days as opposed to physical ailments. And it was because of how draining the day could be or the job could be and needing those mental breaks. But being very afraid to admit that in the beginning. And then, like I said, it slowly started, like you're saying, it's slowly starting to be more recognized as take a mental health day then. But before it was very like taboo. It was 100%. Very like, what's wrong with you if you're taking a day off, or, go to work and you should, my grandpa was very, very hardworking man, and he never took days off work. So I remember days where I would be like, oh, I took off a day off work, but then I went to go visit my grandparents because I felt like they fed my soul, right? They gave me something that I was needing, especially my grandma, because I had such a great connection with her. And I remember he'd get so mad. He'd be like, why aren't you at work? And I'm like, I am taking a mental health day. And for him, it was not something you do.
That generation just didn't understand
No.
it, right?
There was no such thing.
No.
So he just thought I was like, and
maybe
it was a little bit sometimes, but there was this element of needing that space.
Yeah.
And needing that.
A break.
Yeah, a break.
Yeah. And,
So,
like the teaching world is, and nobody understands it till you're actually in schools dealing with kids on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
How giving that area of work is.
Depleting.
Yeah.
I would say.
Like you're always, and you're always on the go.
Always on the go, always on, can't take bathroom breaks, can't, there's literally no time to yourself until you leave. And then even that, if you're going home to families or other things, or there isn't necessarily a time to slow down. And it's so funny because people always used to complain outside of the teaching world of how much teachers get time off, or how many weeks they get off, or they get the summers off, they get this, why do they need this? Trust me, until you do it, you don't know.
Hey, parents,
how much
parents have their kids for 2 weeks at Christmas break, and then they're like, "We're ready to send you back."
Exactly,
and that's why, or the summer, right?
Right.
But yeah, my non-teaching friends, like I tell them, from September to June, it is go for us, and it's a very overstimulating environment too. And that's like one of the things that, like, I would say in my career self, like, drives me crazy. Like, like that overstimulating environment. Like when I had lunchtime and I put myself on like strict boundaries where I was like, lunchtime is, because there were days where I would skip lunch.
Yep.
Keep working. And just kind of like work through like my lunches. But now like, I'm like, no, I'm actually going to do what it takes to take care of myself during the workday as well, and like have my lunch. But like there are days where like I switch off the lights in my own classroom, the door is closed, and I just like have a moment, because like it's very overstimulating. Like the environment is just like loud and noisy, and like there's lots going on where if you don't give yourself that break, it can be crazy.
The hardest room for me was kindergarten.
Yeah.
Because the amount of stuff in those rooms, like the different centers and the just the toys and the activities and it was like. And for a kid that was struggling, those rooms were the hardest rooms, because it was so funny because, like, the kids that destroy the rooms, like throw everything around the room. Yep. It's literally because they're overstimulated and there's so much stuff going on that they just try to take control over it in a sense by, in a destructive way. But it's I get it in that sense of like being overwhelmed by the amount of stimulation.
Yeah, but I'm like that too, just as a person, right? Like I don't deal well with clutter everywhere, with like disorganization. Like it overwhelms me.
Yeah.
So if there's like an A-type student like me in my classroom, like they would get with like things everywhere and like the noise level and like the different personalities. But yeah, kindergarten room is like, that's why I always say like it takes a very special person to be a true, genuine kindergarten teacher.
Absolutely. 100%.
Like, yeah. And at 30 in a room is no joke either, right?
No. So that's another conversation of like why we have so many when they're so little, and then it gets less as they get older. That
brings us back to that conversation you had about falling through the cracks, right?
Yeah.
When you have so many bodies in a room, you're not getting to know your students. You're not getting to know what they need. You're not getting to know like what they need to be nurtured with. And then, hey, if that kid's like not making noise, if they're not being loud, and they know how to like do their ABCs and their numbers, you're golden.
Yep.
And then, but I don't really know what's mentally going on.
No.
Like in their head or at home or anything, right? But they're performing well, and that's all I need. Check. Off you go to grade 1.
Right. So how do you think, as a teacher, you started to shift what you were maybe taught, not like taught in a sense of like that wasn't useful as well, but how did you branch from sort of the regular just subject material into things that were a little bit more mindful? And like, was that a piece that you always knew was there, or is it something you learned?
So I got into yoga and mindfulness, and I think that's also one thing that we have in common, right?
Yep.
Like in my early 20s.
Okay.
My first job, and there was a yoga studio right across from where I was working. And some of my colleagues used to go at lunchtime, and they just came back so relaxed, like zen. And I was like, I'm gonna go try hot yoga with them. So, and it was perfect because it was like a 45-minute, like they called it a power lunch class. And you went 45 minutes, did yoga, came back. And like that's how I spent my lunch hour. And I was like, and even as a teacher, I'm like, wow, like imagine if you got like even just like 20 minutes of yoga in the school day to kind of just have like a space. I even say that often, like a space dedicated in the staff room where you could have like, we make quiet corners for students, quiet corners for like staff members. And I just loved the effect that yoga had for me as a person. Like I could literally see it not like transform my like body, but my mind.
Yes.
And I felt like when I came back from like my yoga class at work, like I was more focused, like I was happier. I didn't need like that, like, 3 o'clock, like coffee pick me up. Like I went for yoga. I just felt so good.
Yeah.
And I honestly continued it like after that, like well into like I became a mom, and then, priorities kind of shifted. But when I became a teacher, I had the most difficult classroom ever. I had 20, it was my first classroom as a teacher, and I had 27 students. Wow. 27.
Yeah.
All with like so many different needs. And I was like, how can we kind of bring, Zen into this classroom, be all on the same page, and kind of, just give these children what they need, because obviously like academics was not cutting it. Like that's not what that's not what was feeding them. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that quite quickly. And also like I was going crazy in that classroom.
Yeah. What grade was that?
That was grade 2.
Okay. Little.
They were little.
Yeah.
And I started to research like kids yoga, because I was like, if yoga did that for me, and if like little bits of like mindfulness did that for me, like imagine if we started this young and did it with them. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like I did it in my first year. And I loved the effect that it had in my classroom. Honestly, they used to ask for it on days that I forgot. And I have continued ever since. And I'm still not like, we're just going to do math and we're just going to do literacy and off you go. I think report cards for me are like so much more than like what we kind of put down in them.
Yeah.
And that like behind the work of what like I like to do in my classroom really shines through to get them to be where they are. Mm-hmm. And like, going back to like how we even started this conversation about giving the students that space to just like be themselves, like come and vent, come and like have, a day in my classroom. Yeah. So like the last class that I taught was actually, before I went on mat leave, was grade 5. I loved it, Tanya. It was amazing. Yep. And I was afraid because I was like, oh my God, they're like on the cusp of like being tweens. Yep. Some of them already have like their hormones started. Like I was nervous to be a grade 5 teacher, but I loved it because I actually got to teach. They appreciated yoga and mindfulness. Like we started our day with affirmations. Like beautiful. We had like a slow morning day where they came in, they, picked up a book. So it was called like Joyful Hour, and they could do for half an hour whatever brought them joy. So whether that was listening to music, whether that was playing video games, whether that was like just coming and having a chat with me. I had students that would just come and be like, how are you? Like, how was your day? And what's happening in your life? And I would do the same. And I feel like when you create that space for your students, that's when you start to see them flourish in other areas.
Yeah.
Right? Because not everyone is coming to school for academic needs.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot that happens behind the scenes that we don't know about. Family life, you know, sometimes they're not like academically inclined.
Sure.
Right? And like, I feel like as teachers, if we keep pushing that agenda, that self-confidence always like dampens
Yes.
who they are.
Yeah.
Right?
I also think it's a piece of knowing, instead of always focusing on what they're doing wrong, which is what we do, right?
100%.
Where they're struggling. If they're struggling in math, get them a math tutor. If they're struggling in, focus on that.
Yeah.
It's like, should we be doing that? Or maybe they're just never going to be strong in that, and let's focus on their strength.
100%.
Let's focus on what they're great at. Let's make, like what you said, brings them joy. Like, if I could go back and be a kid of being taught, focus on what brings you joy and find what that is and run with it.
Yeah.
Because that's where your happiness is, right? As opposed to maybe what you're good at, but doesn't really bring you joy, right? There's a balance there. But I think it's just that piece of knowing that you can bring into their lives joy, peace, calmness, mindfulness, all of those things is such a huge piece of the puzzle that not everybody knows and understands. And I went through a very similar path in the sense of I did a mindfulness course at a yoga studio. And it was just like 4 or 5 sessions, I think, that lasted for like a month and a half. And I got so much out of it. And I was like, if I'm getting stuff out of this, what could kids get out of this? Learning about mindfulness and yoga at a younger age, that you bring it through into your teens, into your 20s, as opposed to where we started it around our 20s. So I went through that same path, and I started a yoga program, went to take yoga, how to teach kids yoga, and then got certified in that, and then brought into it a mindfulness and yoga program for kids that, really fed my soul, but fed theirs. And it was really such a beautiful thing to do, and will continue to do and continue to bring into whatever work I do, because if you can just teach kids how to kind of slow it down, breathe, think those kind of more affirmations and positive thoughts, and practice gratitude, all of those things that we're not taught. If we can just start teaching it at a younger age, the world would be such a more beautiful place, and a calmer, less anxious, less crazy place to be. And I fed my soul, and I thought right away the same thing. How do I bring this to kids?
Yeah.
How do I teach this to kids now?
Yeah, like there's concepts that we still teach, and I'm like, how is this going to help you when you're 25?
Yeah.
Like really knowing all the different shapes is going to, you're going to use a rhombus when you're 25. But no, if you did affirmations instead and taught that piece, like I almost say, like, anyone who's going to encounter children in their lives, I would like highly recommend some sort of like kids yoga or mindfulness course, because it's going to transform the way you interact with them, in the way that you see them, and in the way that you teach them.
Yeah.
And I feel like it also kind of helps you self-regulate.
Yeah.
Right? Because
100%.
it allows you to be in a place where you're seeing things from their perspective as well. And it's allowing you to kind of step back a little and be like, this is what this child is needing from me right now, right? And how can I give it to them?
Yeah.
And for me, to be honest with you, like the first month, like September, when kids come to my classroom, we never get into the curriculum, right? All I do is like yoga and mindfulness, and like build up like that person that's come into your class, and that's going to help the rest of the 9 months.
Of course it
as
is.
opposed to just being like, day one, here are some sheets. Get to work, kids, you know? And like I spend that time in the beginning, which kind of like allows for the classroom to kind of gain this rhythm that we do together. And, you know,
I was going to say, it sets up a routine, right?
It sets up a routine.
It sets up a
and it
routine.
helps you as like a person and as an educator, because you know exactly what they will be getting out of this experience, and they know what you're going to be providing them as well. Like, you know, I had my grade 5 students who would literally not go to recess because they would want to sit there and chat with me. And I was like, no, I'm going to have my lunch. Goodbye. Like, off you go outside to play. But like, you know, when you set that up, like they know that there's this form of connection that they can like, you know, converse with you and like come in for like their mental health breaks. I remember that like there was a few schools, and I don't know if it's, and you would probably know better because you were directly in that area, but like I know a few schools that I supply taught at, and they would have like a guidance counselor position. And I think that that should be done like, and this was mainly like, I would say grade 4 and up, but I feel like it should start at like kindergarten.
Yeah, it should. And the focus of what they're teaching might look different if they incorporated some more mindfulness practices.
100%. Right? Yeah. And like for me, you know, like the big aha moment was the pandemic. That's all I did. Like we focused on mental health.
Yep.
And just even having, you know, these kids that I taught like online, and like we kind of just focused so much on mental health that like I saw them kind of feed off of it so much, even just like online. That I was like, this is what the foundation of education needs to be. Like this is where you start.
That's where you start. It's interesting. I did the same thing in the few, I did only a few supplying online because they weren't really asking for supplies. But when I did do it, I remember it turned into an LTO, like a long-term occasional, because they loved me so much because they're like, what are you doing with these kids? Like, why are they asking for you? Why are they, like after one day of doing, you know, an online class or, you know, working one-to-one with them even for extra help, I did do a lot of more mindful mental health type stuff. And these kids were like walking away being like, oh, like feeling heard, feeling seen, feeling like they wanted to learn from me, come back to me. And it turned into a little contract position when I went back in school. And it was the same thing. It was in like a behavioral class sort of thing where kids would drop in either getting in trouble or coming there in need of help or whatever. And it to me, it comes so naturally to make the mental health side piece so important. But
going back to that, you mentioned like behavior, like, you know, those like needs that like students want and like acting out. It's interesting that that's sort of seen as just bad behavior and not like a need that needs to be addressed. So the last class that I was at in grade 5, I had the kid in the entire school that was like, oh man, like you have this kid this year, like good luck. And it honestly, for not a moment did like I hesitate and like be like, oh man, I'm gonna have the worst school year now. And he came with a behavioral assistant. I had to so it was the school year that I was actually pregnant, so I was leaving. So I only taught from September till about January. By the time we kind of rolled around to like before the Christmas break, the behavioral therapist was dismissed. Like he had to go help other classrooms because like this kid did not need him at all. And like, you know, teachers came up to me before and they were like, you know, like he'll have like this that you'll have to provide him and this. But like the fact that like we had, slow mornings and like he would get to do what he wanted to do as opposed to a teacher being like, this is what you're doing and this is what you have to do. Like I didn't put those expectations on him, right?
Yeah.
I asked him to thrive in the way that suited him best.
Of course.
And he was like, okay, like she's here to, and I told him like, this is a two-way relationship, right? Like you do things for me and I do things for you. And that's how it's going to work. But I set him up like mentally where he was like, I don't
set him up for that success. Yeah.
Like people are like, oh, he's a runner. So he'll run away.
Sure.
He'll have like days where he'll have a meltdown and like, just brace yourself.
Yep.
And that's why I always also say like, it's so important for educators, like to get some sort of like training in like, mental health.
Yeah.
And like, don't go with the traditional like rules that school boards like, give us.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different tools that can be used. It's not a cookie cutter like way to deal with it.
It's not. And I think every kid is different, and that need to bring forth a sense of like, I don't even know how to say it, but like a sense of normalcy to their crazy.
Yes.
Right? Like they just need to feel like they're heard, seen, and understood so that they can thrive.
Yeah.
And if you set them up in a way that makes them feel safe and maybe give them a little bit of that control, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Like a little piece of like you said, you get to do whatever you want for 20 minutes. What is that 20 minutes going to do for you? Take away from you? Nothing.
No.
What's it's going to give to them is everything.
Yeah.
So you're setting it up for a way that it's like, wow, I get to do whatever I want in school.
Yeah.
Like that's
You're
unheard
giving
of.
them that autonomy. You're giving them that like responsibility.
And fun.
Yes.
Fun.
I know.
Kids need fun.
Yeah, they
They
do.
need fun.
Everyone needs
So
fun. Like
everyone
not
needs
just
fun.
not even kids.
Yeah.
And I say that all the time. Like, I think as adults we forget to play. We
Yeah.
forget what it's like to be a kid again.
Yeah.
And that's also an aspect of like taking care of like your mental health, right? Like
Yes.
I think we just forget to like laugh more often
Yes.
and just, be ourselves and like play and like we just like become like these like serious beings.
Well, the older we get, the less creative and imaginative we become, even though we are still those people and we do still have to feed that child in
Yes.
us. But people get lost in the like, oh, I need to pay my bills and go to work and do it. And it's like life doesn't have to be that miserable. It can be fun and playful, and like the things that feed your soul are probably the silliest things you could do. And that's why I think people start to feel so like childlike again a little bit when they have their own children, because they start to
Your inner child comes alive. Yeah.
But if you don't, and you're a person that chooses not to have kids, which is totally fine, I think you lose that playfulness.
Yeah.
And I don't know, the things that feed me, the things that I love to do the most are like always these silly, like I love to dance and sing.
Why? I was just
like,
doing this morning in the kitchen.
Like in my own little
my son came
space.
down. I was like dancing in the kitchen, and he's like, "Mommy, what are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm dancing. Dance with me." Like you have to do small things that bring you joy. Like you just have to.
I think so too. And I think it's such an important thing to and I think when you work with children or when you have children, or like we said, those will bring out those sides of you naturally. And I think the best teachers and the best people in the field and the best parents are the ones that kind of get down with the kids and play and get dirty sometimes or get whatever and just like let themselves be kids too. And kids love that. Like when kids see you, like I'm sure when your son saw you being silly, he was just like, this is
But he was like laughing and like
he loved
smiling,
it.
right?
So-
But that like, and I think that's also important, like whether you work with kids or not, whether you have your own kids or not. But I feel like you should always have like this childlike, like innocence to yourself. Like, so one thing about me, like I love watching Disney movies.
Yeah.
So like there was a time frame where like, I was obviously like old enough and didn't have like my own like kids at that time, obviously, but like this was like, back in like in my 20s, but also didn't have like any nieces and nephews. But like I would still watch Disney movies.
Yeah.
And like people would be like, "You watch Disney movies?" I'm like, "Yes, I watch Disney movies because
They're the best.
like they're amazing
Yeah.
and why not?" Right?
Yeah,
So
they do make you feel so childlike too.
so
There's something about a
I
Disney
feel like there should be something that you hold
Yeah.
on to that brings you like that childlike
Yeah.
joy, and whatever that may be, and you just kind of like nurture that over the years, and I
have
think
to.
that would like help you,
Yeah.
right? Like, where's your
does.
safe spot that like, and that's what I guess like the innocence of children as well is like that safety, like what brings you joy and what's like that safe spot for you. And I think that people should like find that and like do it.
Yeah, nurture that inner child.
Or even just like for me, it's also like just finding like happy places, right?
Yeah.
Like, where are your happy places?
Yeah.
Find them and go to them often.
Yep.
Like, it doesn't have to be a big, grand, happy place. Like, we're not telling you to go to like, a beach or
Sure.
like Disney.
Sure.
But like, if you like the ambiance of like a nice coffee shop,
Yeah.
go there.
Yeah.
Like, sit there, have your coffee there. It's going to take, a whole 5 minutes. So what? It's going to bring you like your peace, right?
Right.
But even like during the school day, like I found like this one year that I practiced, and it was actually like, it was one of the first schools that I taught after the crazy school that I was at. But like I would see like my grade 2 colleagues, and this was like a wonderful school that I was at. They would leave at lunch like every day, and I was like, where do they go at lunch? Like, why? Where they go somewhere every day at lunch, and it would be like a group of them. And finally, like I joined them, and they were like, we just like to like we bring lunch from home. But they're like, we just like to get out of the school building, not be around kids, not be around negative teachers, because that's what they do in the staff room.
Just talk shit.
yak.
Yeah.
And we just like to go to a different spot every time and just get out of that environment and just, have happy conversations, nothing about school, nothing about like, how miserable it is to be a teacher.
Sure.
None of that. We just like every single time talked about like happy, personal, like what everyone is doing. And it would be just a different, and it didn't have to be like, like some days we would just go sit in like the food court at Fortino's,
Sure.
or like, some other spot. And then like, as I started to join them, like, yeah, this is so much better than going to the staff room and just like listening to like how rotten everyone's day is going.
There was nothing worse to me than a staff room in a school. Like there's no other place I'd rather be, like, because I felt like a kid in a staff room. Like I shouldn't be there. Like I was like there, but I was an adult and I was teaching and I was working in my, whatever. But I'd step into a staff room and I'd feel like I didn't belong instantly.
Yeah.
So I get that piece of it, and getting outside and doing something different and filling your cup and giving yourself some joy. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Figure out a way to do that when separate your day, right? Like
Yeah.
a chunk of your day can be go somewhere else.
And that's your break. That's your like, this is me time, right? And it's important.
No, I love
we
that.
need to do that.
That definitely brings in a lot of like just pieces to find peace. I think that's what what people need to do, right? Like just to find anything to bring them some joy, peace, calmness, and just give yourself that break.
Yeah. And I always say that, even like now as a mom, like it doesn't need to be some sort of like grand gesture, right?
Yeah.
Like your favorite cup of coffee, your favorite meal, just like listening to music, listening to something that brings you joy, reading something.
Sure.
Anything that kind of gives you like that like snippet of like a daily habit that like is just allows for you to come into like this place of like peace,
Right.
is important.
I love my guest last time, Tiffany. She said something that really resonated with me, of something that I would want to bring with me if I do and when I do become a parent, is allow because people think that you have to like leave your old self behind to be this new person. And it's like, no, bring
Bring
her
her.
with you.
Yeah.
And allow her to still have joy and time and things to herself.
100%.
You don't have to completely give yourself up
No.
to be a parent.
No.
And I just love how she just brought it, like, bring her with you.
Yeah.
Because so many women
Because she's always
think
there. She's going to be there.
She's always going to be there.
She's the one who kind of, took that next step.
Yeah.
Right. And I also say that, like, you have to be able to acknowledge that I think we kind of like had this mindset of like, oh, I'm 41 now, so I'm a grown adult.
Yes.
But like, I think you should acknowledge the fact that you're always growing.
Yeah.
Right? Like you never stop growing. Like
Yeah.
you're not the same person you
No.
were when you were 16. You're not the same person that you were when you were 21. You're not the same person when you were 25, 30.
Yeah.
Like you're always evolving and you have to give yourself room to grow as well.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think we need to always understand that like we're always growing and changing and learning and it's okay to like outgrow people and
Yeah.
outgrow situations and outgrow
sure.
relationships.
Yeah.
Like it's totally okay and you should be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Like it should be like I've grown and like kudos to me for doing that and now this is who I am, but that's a part of me that I've always like had as well.
Yeah. Well, I think to think that you're grown and not growing is a problem.
100%.
Because then you think you know everything.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
still don't, right?
No.
Like you're still, I remember like turning 21 and feeling like before 21, I knew everything. And you're just like, I know everything.
Yeah.
You argue with your parents about like all the things that you think you know and they
Yeah.
know nothing. And then like there was literally like this point where I turned 21 where I'm like, I don't know anything. Like, and I just started to realize the
Or a new
process.
phase in your
Yeah.
life, right? Like when you enter, I feel like new phases in your
Yeah.
life that are unfamiliar to you,
Yes.
right? And you go in them and you're like, I think I got this. But then when you're in it in the thick of it, you're like, oh man, like,
Yeah.
no, I don't have this. And it's okay to admit that.
Yes.
Right? And I think a lot of people are scared to say like,
don't
oh,
know.
I don't think
Well, your
I
ego comes into
perceived
it.
it that, yeah.
Your ego comes into play and you think that
100%.
you can't admit to anything, like that you don't know what you're doing. There's a fear involved in that too, that you think something's going to happen to you if you don't know something and admit to, not knowing and then you're
Yeah.
going to get in trouble or something like that.
Yeah.
But I think the piece of, you're right, that not knowing, admitting that you don't know, or even admitting when you're wrong, those are all really big pieces of growth and like taking on that piece of like, I don't know everything and letting your ego down a bit and just being like, I was wrong or I maybe need to change something about what I did.
Yeah.
Or I don't know how to do something. Can you help me? Yeah. Can you help me is a big piece too, asking for help.
Yeah.
So I think all of those things play into our growth.
Yeah.
Because at any point in our lives, we can be presented with something that we didn't know
Yeah.
and that we don't know and becomes a new challenge into our world and we have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap that up in a pretty bow because I love that we got to touch upon growth and things with mindfulness. And I wanted to talk about our yoga experiences together because I think that connected us on such a level of just, I just always loved as knowing you as a teacher because I've worked with teachers a majority of my life and some of them are very stuck in their ways, type A, and like we just always connected on what we can do to like really help these kids and what they really need.
Yeah.
And I just love that we kept that up and that you're continuing to do it in your everyday practices and that I don't know, that it just helps change the world in the best way possible. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
And I always thought that we had that connection with, sort of seeing things outside of the box, and like how to help kids that don't fit in that neat little box that sometimes we're trying to stick them in, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
And like to me, like when you mentioned that, like you no longer work with kids, like that to me was like a loss, right?
Yeah.
But like think about it this way too, is like that burnout that we feel as educators, we're like, all right, my ways are not I tried and they're not
Yeah.
working. And mentally for me, this is not
It
working
was
out.
a different choice. Well, I still work with kids to some capacity in like the entertainment industry, but it is very different to get outside of the schools.
Yeah.
And that environment
That
for
realm.
me wasn't serving me anymore. Just because I didn't feel like I could totally be myself.
Yeah.
But it'll always carry through with me, and there's always dreams and aspirations I have to carry on.
Well, it's transferable skills,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
You
yeah,
can
and
use
I'll
them
always have them.
anywhere.
I'll always have them. And yeah, to bring them to my own kids one day and that stuff is
Yeah.
what I would love to do. But yes, thank you so much for doing this and
Thank you
sitting
for
down
having me.
and, spilling some of your guts to me and like the world out there. But I think you have such a good heart and soul and mind and just have a lot to share with the world. So I knew I wanted to do this. So thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks for having me. I could talk with you forever. So.
I know, and I love that. So we'll do a part 2 one day.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Incia, for being our first guest of 2025, and thank you all for joining. We'll see you soon. Bye.